And now for a visual representation of how it felt to search for stuff on this topic at times.
What about you guys? We ain't found shit.
You know, as of late, something I feel that's become much more common is stuff that both sides of the aisle hate. One example that comes to mind is Velma, and I don't think I need to go into detail as to why. But before Velma, there was another show I would have used as a go-to example, Gen Z, except it's complicated. I'll explain. Now, I do imagine that there's going to be quite a few people who don't even know what the hell I'm talking about. And to be honest, I actually had considered not making a video on this because, well, this show has remained dormant since 2018, and so making a video on it could cause Fate to decide, hey, let's actually have this get produced. But I have reason to believe this won't happen since, well, I don't think Fate would decide to make this video age that badly, and everyone who's involved seems to want to have moved on and forgotten about this, so I don't think it'll get made. Anyways, as usual, don't harass anyone I mention, although I am going to try and stay neutral throughout this essay. Anyways, let's begin.
I'm thinking of replacing my balls with candy and turning the whole thing into a Pez dispenser.
Gen Z, not to be confused with the K-pop group Gen Z. Yeah, as you can probably guess, it was hard to look up stuff for this essay, was an animated series that was announced in 2015. To paraphrase from TV tropes, Gen Z is an animated comedy show about Shona Summers, a young trans woman who wants to be a stand-up comic who moves in with some of her online friends. Said friends are Cameron, a nerd described as a shit poet, Huey, a tattooed musician who acts like a douchebag, and Betsy, an Asian American Harris who's a prescription drug addict who wants to be a fashion designer. Now, this show was made by Hayden Black, the creator of several live-action shows. I have not seen any of them, so I can't say I'm a fan of his work, although I can't say they're bad either. Now, for what it's worth, he's still making stuff, so this did not end his career. As far as I know, Hayden has not worked on any other animated series either before or after Gen Z, so if this had actually gotten made, Gen Z would have been his first. I have not been able to find anything to indicate if the show was planning to be broadcast on TV. I don't know what networks would have picked it up, maybe Comedy Central, or if it was something intended for streaming, because I could have seen Netflix picking this up if they had found out about it. I mean, there was a time that it seemed like they were picking up anything. It's also entirely possible that Hayden might have considered making this a YouTube exclusive series, since, well, given how successful stuff like The Amazing Digital Circus is currently doing, it's possible he could have envisioned that happening, but that's not what happened with Gen Z.
Betsy, fashion victim.
These are my Iggy Azaleas, and these are my Azalea Banks.
On June 6th, 2015, the trailer for Gen Z, titled Gen Z Promo, was released, and pretty much everyone hated it. On one hand, you had a lot of people who used the fact that Julie Ray Goldstein, the voice actress of Shona, was both Jewish and transgender to be both anti-Semitic and transphobic. On the other hand, the Tumblr crowd, who this show seems to be aimed at, was turned off by some of the jokes that were made. Not helping was the fact that the animation was, well, to be quite blunt, terrible and really stilted. Now, it's worth noting that it's not necessarily a requirement for a show to have great animation, especially if it's comedy. I'm pretty sure even the most diehard South Park fan will tell you that the show is garbage from an animation perspective, but it does help if a show has really good animation. Now, before we move on, I'd like to introduce you to the late Maddie Blaustein. She was a pretty prominent voice actress, a former editor for Marvel Comics, and was also notable for being transgender. She was actually born intersex and transitioned later on in life. You may know of her if you watched the original Pokemon anime, since she was the original voice actress for Meowth in the English dub prior to Nathan Price taking over. She also voiced a bunch of other roles, which I'm showing on screen right now. She unfortunately passed away in 2008. However, she was actually pretty open about transitioning, so it's not like this was something people only found out about by going through her stuff after she died. Now, this is relevant because, well, Gen Z claimed that the show was the first animated show to star a trans actress in a lead role, and pretty much disregarded Maddie's entire career. Obviously, this got backlash from fans of Maddie to the point that the official Tumblr account for the show actually responded. The account gave a pretty rude response, claiming that because Maddie hadn't played the main character in any of the shows she had been a member of the cast for, their claim was still accurate. This is, quite frankly, really insulting to Maddie's memory. I don't know who was responsible for that post, but I'm going to guess it was not Julie Ray Goldstein. I don't know if it was Hayden or one of the other staff members, although seeing as how I do know for a fact that Hayden does have access to the show's Facebook page, or he had, I'm inclined to say it was Hayden. There is one other trans voice actor who was part of the cast of Gen Z, and I'll talk about them in a second. But before we move on, there's one more thing I feel obligated to bring up. I originally wasn't going to add this, but when doing research, I stumbled upon a post in the subreddit for the YouTuber Rebel Taxi talking about this. And they mentioned one of the posters that appears in the trailer, which features one Leela Alcorn. I'll show you a few seconds from the trailer right now. Now, I was using the internet at the time, so I didn't really know much about trans rights. It's at the time when this dropped, nor did I pay much attention to them. So when the trailer first dropped in 2015, I actually had no idea who Leela was. Heck, I wouldn't even be surprised if I had completely missed her poster. However, after I started doing work on this essay, I learned that Leela was an actual person. I would have assumed she was just like an in-universe character. She was a trans girl who took her own life less than a year before the show began. And it's not like this is some obscure case that very few people have heard about. Her death was actually prominent enough that she got her own Wikipedia page. Now, this comes off as really cynical when combined with the aforementioned part about Maddie Blaustein's career. Although, like I said, I do not think Julie Ray Goldstein was responsible for this decision. After all, voice actors are not in charge of the animation, and as far as I know, Julie might not have even watched the trailer. So it's entirely possible she might not know about it. In fact, according to another subreddit comment, and this one for the subreddit of Oni Plays, one commenter talked with Julie, and Julie later realized that the show was actually super exploitative when asked about it. Again, secondhand information, so it's entirely possible that's false, but I would not be surprised if that's true.
Cannot live at home, so the answer is shit.
Based on what I've described so far, as well as the title, you might be wondering what happened to the show when it actually debuted. Did it get critically panned, or did it manage to surprise audiences? Well, that's the thing. It never actually aired a single episode. The only animated things that were really produced for the show were a trailer, which I already mentioned, as well as an entry in the Doritos 2015 Crash the Super Bowl contest. Said entry didn't win, since if it had, you probably would have seen someone else make a video on this. That's not entirely true. There was a pilot produced that was shown at the Long Beach Comic Expo. However, the only claim I could find was from the Lost Media Wiki, so I do not have any clips I could show you. In fact, the show's social media accounts largely stopped being about the show. The last post by the show's Facebook page that was related to the show's production was September 21st, 2016. Gonna hold off on showing the image because it'll be more relevant in a second. In fact, said page largely just began posting about general trans accomplishments, and they certainly could have done worse, like they could have just started posting ads. Okay, technically the last thing related to the show the page posted was a screenshot of a tweet by Shona's account on October 14th, 2016, but that wasn't really a production update. According to the Lost Media Wiki, a release date of 2020 was announced on the now defunct Twitter account for Shona Summers, but nothing ever came from that. Now, I did actually try and reach out to a few cast members. In fact, when I actually first created my Twitter account, I actually messaged Julie Ray Goldstein in an attempt to ask her if the show had been canceled or not, mainly because I wanted to update the TV tropes page for this show. And I don't think it was a particularly rude message, but I never got a response. I also tried to reach out to Hayden Black himself on Facebook. It was the only platform I could find him on. He didn't have a Twitter account or anything, and I did not get a response from him either. So I'm going to speculate on this next bit. If I had to guess what happened to the show, it's likely that it was canceled because of a combination of factors. They could not find a network, it's expensive to animate stuff, and also, given how much the backlash was, it was unlikely to succeed since hate watching can only take a show so far. I wouldn't be surprised if the show was also intending to switch from traditional animation to 3D animation, mainly because, well, this is where that post I refrained from showing earlier comes into play. Namely, Hayden posted about how they received a 3D model for Shona, which would only really make sense if they planned on using 3D animation. And, as I suspected, according according to the Lost Media Wiki, the show actually did plan on switching from 2D to 2.5D, which is basically 3D animation made to look 2D, and they had handed production over to this group called Little Big Fix, who are going to make the change. I have no idea how hard of an undertaking this would have been, but given that animation takes time, as well as the fact that, well, I do know that switching a game engine can really set back like a video game's development, and I'm going to guess that the switch to Little Big Fix delayed things even further, and after a certain point, Hayden decided, you know what, this isn't worth it, so he just pulled the plug.
That's Beast!
And written and directed by...
So, with the cartoon having likely been cancelled, one question remains. What did the cast do after Gen Z? Well, as it turns out, this actually wasn't that big of an impediment on their careers, since, as far as I can tell, all the actors and actresses who were attached to this project have found work afterwards. Admittedly, my source for that is IMDb, which, much like Wikipedia, is reliant on user edits to add information, so I can't say for sure, but still, it's better than nothing. Now, you may remember how I said that there was another trans voice actor who was part of the show's cast, and I wasn't talking about Julie Ray Goldstein. Well, I'm bringing that up now because I'm going to talk about them. That VA is Casey Mongillo. Prior to Gen Z, Mongillo had largely been in some minor roles, including a few video game mods, and the most notable thing they starred in was the web animation Tone. Oddly enough, after Gen Z, Mongillo's career took off. Notable roles they've had since then include Shinji Ikari in Netflix's dub of Evangelion, the redub, not the original, Emporio from JoJo's Bizarre Adventures, Stone Ocean, Giselle from Bleach's Thousand Year Blood War arc, and Chilchuck from Delicious in Dungeon. So, in an odd way, the show's claim about starring a trans VA in a leading role was correct. And it would have been the definition they used. It just wasn't their show, since, Gen Z never came out. Overall, I'd say that this wasn't something that really damaged the careers of anyone that was involved, and given that nothing really aired or was released, it's something that honestly will probably remain a footnote in their careers, and that's probably for the best.
Huey, we're home.
When I started writing this, I found myself wondering if making a video on Gen Z might end up being an unintentional real-life example of all the times in various forms of media where an archaeological expedition or mining operation winds up digging too deep and they unleash something that had been sealed away, like in Kamen Rider Kuga or the gorilla song Fire Coming Out of the Monkey's Head. However, as I researched into this, I realized that pretty much everyone forgot about it, and given that it's entirely possible that one day someone might stumble upon this and get curious about what happened, I figured why not make a video to answer the questions of those people. It's what I would want to see. Anyways, thanks for tuning in. I'm Andreas, and I'll see you on my next assignment. Later.